Scott Morrison is today in Vietnam. Now, normally a visit to a country like that is a bit of a ho-hum. I mean, sure, trade with Vietnam is worth, what, $14 billion a year, but it's nowhere near one of our bigger trading partners. But China has changed so much. And right now, Vietnam and Australia, former enemies in the Vietnam War, now need each other. See, China has stolen the South China Sea to our north, where most of our trade sails through. And worse for Vietnam, China is encroaching on that sea where once Vietnam thought it was its own. 5 years ago, it moved in an oil rig to Vietnam's territory in that South China Sea. And that triggered riots in Vietnam and clashes between Chinese and Vietnamese ships. They were ramming each other and spraying each other. I mean, we're talking about two countries that have already had a war. China has also chased Vietnamese fishermen away from fishing grounds claimed by Vietnam and now has sent a survey ship into Vietnamese water, a ship that's been guarded by Chinese Coast Guard vessels. So China very much wants us to help push back against this Chinese aggression. Maybe, I don't know, do more military patrols in the South China Sea. Joining me from Hanoi is Sky News host Annalise Nielsen, who's covering Scott Morrison's visit. Annalise, it's great to see you. This is the first time in 25 years the Australian Prime Minister has made a standalone visit to Vietnam. Why now?
Well, there have been Prime Ministers who visited in that time, but never for a bilateral. It's always been for other summits or other meetings, and so this is very significant, as you say. The reason now is Vietnam is becoming a lot more prominent. They've become a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and they're also chairing the ASEAN summit next year, which is really key for setting the policy agenda for Southeast Asia. And Australia is obviously wanting to get in early and get those relationships going, get the dialogues going with Vietnam to make sure that they get to dominate the agenda. But there is also that approach where they want to be able to dictate some of the policy around the Southeast Asian region, and there is that push against China's dominance here. Australia feels it, as you say, because we do need to protect our trade routes, and Vietnam's obviously at the forefront. They share a border with China, and those territorial waters keep becoming more contentious. And Vietnam is growing rapidly. It's not just the two-way trade between the two countries that's a strong indicator. It's the fact that their economy is performing strong themselves. They have a growing middle class, just like we saw China really pull themselves out of poverty with their growing middle class. And so Vietnam is a huge potential growth area for Australian businesses, and that's really what is key for the Australian government. That's what all the conversations are about, even if we know there is that undertone of wanting to make sure that there are regional partners who aren't in lockstep with China around the region. We know it's much easier to sway some of those smaller countries with big donations like we've seen the Chinese government do already to increase their soft power. But this is the chance for Australia to start building and being a leader with the backing of the United States. I don't think we're going to see anything come out of this weekend with the word China in it. I don't think we're going to see it in the MOUs or any kind of communiques. But what we will see is a strong commitment to protecting international law and to protecting those rules, and that will be very much heard in China. They'll know that that is part of a regional push to make sure those trade routes are protected.
Yes, that's because China's grab of the South China Sea has been ruled against international law. So that's the code there. Now, one of the problems, of course, of Vietnam has been traditional rival or enemy or whatever, or, you know, suspicious of China, has been that it's been a really insular country, this communist regime. It has not made, reached out and made many friends. So it's interesting it's trying to do a little bit like that now. What do you think it wants from us, particularly with vis-a-vis China?
Well, it is interesting, isn't it? We do have Scott Morrison as part of his plan going to see Ho Chi Minh's old home. It's the same thing Barack Obama did when he visited, and that is that strong sense that there is going to be no kind of pressure from Australia to discuss anything internal within Vietnam, because it would go down like an absolute lead balloon. But there is that real push to make sure that those relationships are continuing. And it is extraordinary. You're absolutely right. It was only a few decades ago we were at war with Vietnam. We're only waiting for the Prime Minister to arrive and stay just a few hundred metres from where John McCain was imprisoned as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. So it is extraordinary how much has changed in that time, but it all comes down to cash. It's all about the economy. Big opportunities here for Australian businesses. $4.5 billion in two-way trade. You're absolutely right. It isn't by any means one of our more significant partnerships, but the growth is there, and so they're seeing the potential. It's only second to India and that growth of two-way trade, and there is a population of $95 million here, and so they want to know that they're open for business.
Yeah, that is a bigger population than many people actually know about, and I think you're absolutely right. And the Vietnamese have got a really entrepreneurial culture, so, you know, who knows, blue skies. Annalise Nielsen, thank you so much indeed for your time.